And welcome to another edition of Two Steps Ahead podcast, encouraging you to take your passion, make it happen, let yourself be great. I'm Son Edom. Coming up on the show, we're going to touch on something that affects us a little bit more than what we might think it does, and maybe focus on something, or at least raise awareness of a topic, an issue that maybe we really don't pay much attention to. And that is the topic of suicide. So February 4th is the anniversary date of one of my best friends from high school, elementary school, from my youth, really. Chris passed away in a car accident on February 4th, our senior year in high school. And so along with February, it's just a time of reflection about the memories that took place, of the things that we did together. And then, of course, the what could have been, what might have been. We were scheduled to be roommates at USC. And so, again, it's just kind of one of those things that pops up once a year. It was my first real having to deal with death. Never before had I really had to deal with it. And so this was the indoctrination into end of life that people go through. And so it was a pretty significant event in my life. And so every once in a while, when the situation is right, I'll kind of share the story. And, hopefully it helps others to maybe deal with things that they might be going through, or maybe it will be relatable to somebody, and just kind of let them know that, when you go through something like that, they say time heals all wounds, perhaps. But the scars are always going to be there. The scars on the soul of life will always be there. You might learn to live with it, to cope with it, to deal with it. But I don't think it ever truly goes away. There's always something there, because every year on the 4th, I post something on social media, kind of an in remembrance of. And sure, it becomes repetitious maybe to other people because it's the same photos, because there's no new photos to add. And so, for others, maybe it's repetitious, but at least it's something for me to keep the memories alive, to remember Chris and all the good times we had and the things we went through, and our friendship with the family that I still keep in touch with today. But recently, I was kind of sharing to a group a little bit about Chris and February 4th and the experience of having to go through, that, dealing with it. I mean, when you're a young kid, senior in high school, you're looking forward to college, looking forward to graduation. You're looking forward to, senior prom. You're looking forward to all these exciting things at the end of the year that then have become marred by an experience in February. And then you take a look at the college experience, what could have been. Plans had to change. Never did go to USC after that. So did life take a left turn. But so I like to kind of share these things and how I dealt with it, and kind of how I've experienced it throughout the years, especially to younger people, because maybe at some point in time, they will have to go through this. They will have to go through an experience. And so I was sharing with a group of people, and then afterwards, a gal came up to me and she shared with me her experience, her senior year. A friend of hers took her life, committed suicide. And it was shocking because the gal seemed upbeat, happy, always smiling. There was no indication that there was anything wrong. And it's not really survivor's guilt because you didn't go through that experience, but it's almost like that when you are wondering, what could I have done? Is there anything we could have done? And we'll touch on that in a minute. But as she's sharing the story, even though the end of life was different, we're still senior year in high school. You're looking forward to end of year things. Now those end of year celebrations are kind of marred by the loss. And the similarities were there too, because her best friend went to another school just like Chris did. We went to 2 separate high schools. And so our daily lives weren't necessarily entwined by going to school every single day together, but it was the other things, the weekends, the summers, the spring breaks. Now, in elementary school, we were together all the time. But then when middle school and high school, we went separate ways to different schools, but we still kept in touch and still were tight. And just like the story that this gal told me. And it's still a process because for her, it's a little bit more recent, but it resonates. The things that I went through, the things she's going through. And it's a thing that, again, just in sharing, you don't really get over it. You just learn to kind of cope and deal with it. Now, in this particular instance, she was telling me that, it was a typical day at school for her. Started out at least typical, and she's going through her classes and decides that she's going to send a message to her friend because she notices on social media that her friend has been kind of absent. I guess, nowadays, social media, you can see where everybody's at or find out what they're doing or at least know they're alive based on their social media usage. And it was odd that the day was kind of slipping by and there was no postings or no indication that this person was on social media. And then I guess Snapchat was a big indicator of something going wrong because, again, no postings, no messages, no anything. And so she fires off a message, doesn't get response. Another message, no response. After school, goes home and eventually sees a message on somebody else's social media page, maybe a mutual friend that went to that school. And sure enough, her friend took her life that day while she was at school. Now, for me, it was a phone call on a Saturday morning. Again, went to different schools. It was a Friday night when Chris died. There was a car accident on the way home from a night out with some friends. Nothing, no wrongdoing or anything, just a late night, rainy weather. Truck parked on the side of the road where they shouldn't have been. And all these things came together. And so I get a phone call on a Saturday morning. I'd just seen him the night before at the movie theaters. I was leaving. He was coming in with his friends from his school. I guess he had been at a school basketball game and they were going to a late night movie. I wasn't at any basketball games, so we went to an earlier showing. And so our paths crossed for a few moments, a brief exchange, and then that was it. And so the circumstances were kind of similar between this gal that was telling me her story and my story. And so it resonated. And so we shared a little bit more. And, it's an everyday process for her because she's still kind of going through it because it's only been a couple of years. And then later on, another gal came up to me and we were just kind of talking. And she told me that she had experienced suicide herself. She tried to take her own life. Apparently, she was right out of high school, just graduated from a smaller town, wanted to have the independence, that coming of age story that we perhaps see on TV and in the movies where she moves out, gets her own place with some roommates, goes to college. Then things really don't start to develop like the movies. Struggles happen. Things in life happen. Relationship situations happen, and it starts to get tough. And you get into a depression. And then the depression takes over. And then an incident with a roommate furthers that divide. And then a day when no one's around, the decision is made. Today, I'm going to attempt. I'm going to do it. So she goes about and fortunately was unsuccessful. And now through therapy and family and friends, a support group, she's still here to share a story. But more importantly, she's still here. And so she was kind of telling me how she went through that. And I started to think about it. There's probably somebody that we all know, either directly or maybe indirectly, that we know that have taken their lives. I mean, think about it. If you think about maybe like when I was growing up in LA, Dodger Stadium, I think it had about 56,000 people capacity. You take a look at modern day basketball stadiums, maybe they're 25,000, somewhere in there, maybe 30. I know like the new Oakland A's stadium, or I guess they're the Sacramento A's. Eventually the Las Vegas A's are going to have a stadium of about 35,000. And so you can take a look at these arenas and these ballparks, and then you can kind of get a sense that when they say about 50,000 people a year die from suicide, it kind of puts it into perspective, doesn't it? I mean, you have like a stadium full of people every year taking their lives. I think it averages out to, they were saying like one loss of life by our own hands every 11 minutes. And through this 1 hour podcast episode, that's 10 people, 9 people. 13.2 million people, according to the CDC, have seriously thought about it. Of that, 3.8 million have made a plan. 1.6 million have attempted suicide. And those come from 2022 statistics alone, apparently. And so you can see it's pretty prevalent. And there are different aspects to it. There are different reasons why they do it, whether it starts off with them being bullied. The gal that shared her experience with me, just depression set in. And it just got deeper and deeper, and she didn't know who to talk to, didn't really feel like she could talk to anybody. The other gal that shared it was her friend. I don't think there really was a reason that she got, because it was too late. But the one thing that was impressed upon me by the gal that shared her experience with having personally tried to attempt suicide, because I was curious and I asked, can I ask you some questions, just out of, wanting to know. And it was a complex decision. It wasn't just one thing. I mean, you think about Robin Williams, actor, had it all. Kurt Cobain, Nirvana, revolutionized music there, had it all. I know what, Chad Pennington, the guy from Lincoln Park. I know Pennington's his name. Chester Bennington. He, again, Lincoln Park, his suicide impacted a lot of people. And I know there's others along the way, celebrities that had it all. But for some reason inside them, they just had something wrong, some mental health issues. So it's a complex issue, and we know that. And so when I was asking the question, maybe was there a reason or two, and there wasn't. It's a complex issue. It's things that happen that just build upon each other, and it just led to a depressive state. A depressive state kept getting deeper and deeper, and with no outlet, it just consumed her. But you can't pinpoint one thing or another that was it. The moment that she decided was the moment when nobody was around and she felt this was a good idea, but she couldn't put her finger on one thing that said this was it. So we know it's a complex issue. And we also know that for people that are left behind, we always ask, what could we have done? Could we have done anything? Is there anything that we should be looking for? But there's not much we can really do. We can keep an eye out. We can look for the differences. But again, when you're dealing with a complex issue where the person is conflicted, like the one gal was telling me that, she moved out wanting this coming of age story like she saw in the movies, but that wasn't there. So that might have triggered some things. Of course, roommate situations and things that happen in real life with roommates and stuff, and struggles of real life, especially as an 18, 19-year-old, that can be very hard. When you don't feel like you have any support, that could be difficult. We all know the struggles of life can be hard just in general. And it's like a balance. If you think about the scale, like those old time scales where you maybe have something on this side and then you have to balance it with this side. And if one side's too heavy, it starts to tilt, and eventually you get that right balance, right? But then something just tips it, tips, and then pretty much just flips the thing over because one too many elements went on one side to tip the scales. The finger of life was on the scale and it tipped it, and we couldn't cope. I always believe, when people get to be 18, 19, graduate from high school, a lot of times they're considered an adult, and some will actually get kicked out of their house. Some will say, okay, you're an adult now, go be an adult, get a job, do all this stuff. And it's somewhat fair. But just like an infant brought into this world has to be taken care of, has to be taught life and taken care of. It's the same for, I think, 18, 19, 20, college age kids. They're in the infancy of adulthood, and they need to kind of still have that guidance because they don't know. They don't know what it's like to be an adult. They've never experienced it. They've never had that freedom. And with the freedom comes a lot of responsibility, but yet they were still kind of sheltered in high school, right? We have excuses maybe for some bad things that we've done, or maybe we didn't get our homework done, or we maybe shirked our responsibilities. There's real no ramifications from it. Maybe a little bit, but in real life, if you don't pay the rent, you're homeless. If you don't go to work, you don't get paid. See, there's greater ramifications from it. And without that guidance and without being taught how to manage and without someone maybe to talk to, and when you have roommates and they're depending upon you and other people are depending upon you, you can see how that scale will slowly start tipping towards one side, the negative side, before it flips over. And for some people, they go down that path, thinking the only way out is to take their life. When people do decide and perhaps are successful, because in the course of her healing and in the course of her therapy and stuff, it's a personal thing. Has nothing to do, she said, it has nothing to do with everybody else. It's a personal thing. They don't want to hurt anybody. They don't want to make anybody feel bad. But it's a personal thing for them. And so when we sit there, I guess, and we say, what could I have done? I should have known. That's really not the intention, because they're not trying to hurt you. And it's a secret. I think that was the thing, keeping it a secret. Not letting other people know, because we can't let people know we have bad days. And so keeping it secretive was part of the depression that tipped the scales, working on keeping it secret. We can't let people know that we're depressed. We can't let people know we're feeling bad. And the other thing she said, so she was, trying to explain these things, and I'm just trying to take it and categorize it, but not wanting to hurt you. And they know you love them. Like, she knew everybody loved her. It wasn't like, oh, people don't love me. She knew that. But yet it was still something that was very complex, something that was still inside her that she was battling, that she was trying to deal with. And so when you get into it, it really comes down to, is there something we can do? And that's the question, because it's real. And again, pause for a moment and think, is there somebody I know? I had a distant cousin, I think like a second cousin, maybe something like that, on the family tree. And a few years ago, I guess it's a number of years ago now, we started, communicating through social media, getting caught up, because you start to connect and the family tree begins to grow as you connect. And then all of a sudden, one day we're sending emails back and forth, and then nothing. And then the next thing you know, like a week later, found out that she was no longer with us. I suspected, and it was indeed, she took her own life. And I could kind of tell through the emails, but I mean, in hindsight, the emails made sense. But still, getting to know somebody, some of the things were a little quirky. But in hindsight was, it made sense. But if we know somebody, what are some of the things that we can look for? Maybe some warning signs. Obviously, if they're outright talking about killing themselves, that's something that we should probably report or get help or whatever we need to do. 988, I think, is a crisis line, national crisis line for suicide prevention. You can always just hit that on your cell phone. But some more subtle things like taking themselves out of their friends group, like socially removing themselves or withdrawing from society, like social media. Maybe you're not posting as much as you did. I mean, I don't post as much as I did before anymore, so that's not always the case. But for younger people, it might be something. Maybe if you see, different mood swings going back and forth, perhaps that could be an indication. Maybe if they're, writing about it or maybe drawing sketches with death being a part of the theme, that could be an indicator. Maybe just being impulsive or reckless behavior, not caring what happens, maybe taking risks, taking chances. Maybe that's an indicator. Maybe just being aggressive behavior, lashing out. Because, when you feel that pressure inside, the last thing you want is someone nagging at you, let's say. And then what happens? You snap. And then what happens after that is we who got snapped at become butthurt and get mad. Our feelings are hurt. Makes sense. It's natural human behavior to feel that way. But maybe we have to train ourselves to think that, ooh, this is something out of the ordinary from this person. Maybe we need to consider there's something deeper going on. Maybe we need to follow up. And then, of course, if you start to see drug and alcohol use or drug and alcohol use increasing, that could be an indicator. So there are warning signs that could indicate that there's mental health issues going on, there's depression going on, there's something going on that could lead to suicide. And we're not experts. We don't know. It's hard for us to see that. It's hard for us to experience that. It's hard for us to really know. But I guess it's that, see something, say something idea. Something out of the ordinary. Maybe we need to speak up. There's been times where I've asked people, you okay? They're like, no, I'm not okay. Anything you want to talk about? No. Okay. You're not going to hurt yourself, are you? No, I'm not that bad. Are you sure? Yeah, I'm not that bad. Okay, I believe you. And there's times where I've had to ask that because I wanted to know. Now, they could obviously lie and say, no, everything's fine, but then there's something deeper going on. Sure. But at least I'm asking, trying. And maybe that triggers something, maybe not at that moment, but then maybe later on, they may come back and say, oh, you know what? This is really what's going on. Because life, especially now, I mean, we talk about Aubrey Wyatt, probably about 6 months ago, something like that. I think it's episode 201, how she was bullied to the point of suicide. And a lot of it was through social media. We've talked about the increase in social media suicides or suicide related deaths from social media, bullying, and things like that. In tweens is really up. In teens, it's even up more. And so it's there. It's prominent. It's prominent more today probably than it ever has been because of social media and some of the things that we are exposed to. We need to be more diligent in that. Be more diligent in trying to figure out, is there something really wrong with our friends? You see, because we can have bad things go on in life and we could be going through struggles. I mean, there's times even recently where I'm just not motivated to do anything. I go to work, I give it my all. I come home, I think I'm going to do all these things, and then I just sit and veg. because I'm just not motivated. I just don't feel like it. That's okay. There's times when we're going to be like that. I always like to say that whatever you got in your tank for the day, if you can give 100% of that, whatever's in your tank, that's great. Some days it might be I get up, I go to work, I give it my all, I come home and I run through a laundry list of things to do and I get it all done. And I feel great. Then there's other days I have that laundry list of things to do. I get up and I'm like, man, I'm running on empty. So I go to work and I give it my all, whatever that is. It might not be the same as on days that I have 100% in the tank, but I give it my all of what I have. Then I go home and maybe I do nothing. And that's fine. And then I've learned that, you know what? It's okay to let that be, because then sometimes we start to pile on ourselves. And that's the thing we have to be careful of. No matter what we do, we can't pile on ourselves for things we may or may not do that we wanted to get done, or mistakes that we've made. I mean, let's put it simple as this. Let's say you like somebody and you're going to talk to them, and maybe you just start talking to them and you say something, or your conversation, whatever. And then afterwards you go back and you micromanage your conversation. And you're like, oh, I shouldn't have said that. Oh, why did I say that? And now we're focused on all the negative things that think we've said. Or you go to a job interview and you rehash the job interview and you're like, oh, why did I say that? Oh, I could have answered this better. And again, the negative pops up. That's the easy thing to do in life, is have the negativity pop up. But then what happens? You get the job, maybe you end up going on a date, and things aren't as bad from that initial conversation or that interview. Now, in the end, whether your job is a good one or the date ends into a relationship, whatever, that might be something different. But again, in that moment, we don't need to micromanage everything. We can look for the positive. Hey, I gave it my all. I went into the interview. I talked to the person. I attempted something that I wanted to do, and I gave it my all that day. And now that I have more of an elective list of things to do, sure, you might have to eventually get around to it. You know, that pile of laundry that is building up, or the yard chores, whatever. If you don't feel like doing them, maybe that's okay. You don't do them. And maybe that's okay. You don't feel bad about it. I had someone tell me once, we were talking about weight loss and how it's so strict sometimes. You know, you can't have anything. You got to be strict, right? If you want to lose weight. But then she was saying that, you know, she tells her clients that, you know, sometimes they will cave and have a piece of cake. And then they regret having the cake. And so they start kicking themselves for having that piece of cake. She tells them, well, did you enjoy it? And most of the time, like, yeah, I did. Great. Enjoy the cake when you had it. End of story. Next day, move on. Now, if you start having cake every day, that might be a different story. But you had cake one day, who cares? Move on. Enjoy it. Have fun with it. Now you move on. You see, so there's sometimes things where they're not going to go the way we want. They're not going to go as planned. They're not going to go how we think about it, or how we planned it, or how it goes in our mind. You ever do that thing? Well, that went better in my mind than it did in real life. Sometimes it's okay. Just move on. It's probably not the end of the world as we know it. And so you think about suicide in the United States. We talked about 50,000 people in 2022 died by suicide. You know, men, according to the CDC, die by suicide nearly 4 times more often than women. Rural areas tend to have higher suicide rates than urban areas. Well, that kind of makes sense with the 2 gals I talked to. More of a rural setting. And so you start to see some commonalities in some things. And then, of course, you have, you know, other issues like maybe old age, LGBT, chronic illnesses, other subcategories that might have influences Bullying is a big aspect these days. Even going back to, I think I saw a documentary on Columbine shooting, and it's not an excuse, but even survivors of the shooting admitted that these two individuals that committed the crime and then took their own life were bullied. How many times do we see that in a shooting? The students bullied. Doesn't excuse it, but that's a part of it. So we need to check ourselves as well. 90% of people who die by suicide have a mental disorder, whether diagnosed or undiagnosed. Depression increases suicide risk by about 20 times. If they've tried it once before, it could raise the risk for future suicides. Men 45 to 64, the highest rate in many countries around the world. Teen suicide rates have increased over 50% in the past decade. I think we all know that's partially due to social media. And then elderly people, 75 plus, have a high rate of suicide due to isolation and health issues. So those are just some of the statistics that come with it. Mental health conditions, depression, bipolar, schizophrenia, some of those things we can't, as an outsider, can't really help with, right? I mean, yes, there are some things we can do, but without getting deep into it, if you have bipolar or schizophrenia, there's probably some, medical things that need to be done to intervene. But perhaps if your friend is just down, being there for them, just being an ear to listen, not trying to solve the problems, but just listening to them could be something that is helpful. Personal history and behavioral factors. People are starting to self-harm. If you notice self-harm, that could lead to suicide. Impulsivity or aggression could be a sign. Life circumstances. If you see a friend starting to struggle financially, maybe unemployment, maybe they lose their housing. That was part of the problem that led to the one girl telling me about her suicide. There were some financial issues and then some relationship issues also in there. And like I said, some chronic illness and pain, legal problems, isolation and loneliness, bullying, harassment, access to lethal means, exposure to suicide. These are all risk factors that lead to someone wanting to take their own life. And so what you can do is just ask directly, are you thinking about suicide? Yes or no? Doesn't put a lot of people think that puts the idea in their head, but it really doesn't. You're just asking them. And maybe that is a relief for them to sit there and share with you some things. And maybe you can hash it out there, or you go seek help together. You go alongside with them on their journey now. And it's going to take a commitment on your part to be there. But you ask them directly. Listen without judgment. Let them express their feelings. We don't need to fix everything. Just let them share. Being a good listener. And then we could just say things, I'm here for you. I'm here for you. That's probably, if you want to say anything, just say, I'm here for you. Or maybe, is there anything I can do to help you? Can I go with you any place? Make it an us thing. Then they might not feel so lonely. And then just follow up. Simple text, maybe a quick phone call. And just kind of maybe every once in a while, just keep checking in on them. The situation. You can measure it out, how much involvement before you become a burden and add into the scale that's tipping toward the negative, or do you do it just the right amount? So now you're tipping the scale back toward the positive and balancing out the scales, but it's okay to ask and say, hey, what is going on? Are you okay? Do you need help? Are you thinking about doing this? And the biggest thing is without judgment. And then if it does happen, if you experience it, just know there's probably not a whole lot you could have done. Like, don't blame yourself is what I mean. Like, oh, I should have. Well, we can't play that game because it's a complex issue. There's a lot more to it than just one single thing. They knew you loved them. They knew you cared for them. It wasn't about that. And they didn't do it to try to hurt you or get back to you or get back at you. It was something that was going on in their lives, in their mind, in their soul that made it happen. And something we need to discuss and talk about. Maybe there's opportunities for you to take seminars. Maybe there's opportunities for you to do maybe some research on the internet. Instead of scrolling through social media and looking at all the nonsense that's on there, maybe you go through and you take some time instead of the scrolling and do some research on how to prevent, how to help, how to intervene. 988 suicide crisis line. Maybe you can volunteer. Maybe there's some steps you can do in the community. But we got to start the conversation, because if we don't start the conversation, then it just goes by the wayside. And then more and more and more people might be lost because of it.
Every morning we have 86,400 seconds to spend and to invest. And each day the bank named Time opens a new account for you and for me. It allows no balances and no overdrafts. If you fail to use the day's deposits, the loss is yours. What a thing it is when you think that you have just one short life to spend and it'll soon be over. I'd write down my priorities in life. And I'd get committed to certain priorities. Now is the accepted time. The things we ought to do, the classes we ought to take, the books we ought to read, do it now. The family that needs you, spend more time now. Write that letter home now that you've been meaning to write. Money you ought to give now. Time for study, do it now. People you ought to witness to, do it now. Every time the clock ticks, it seems to say now. Today, if you will hear his voice. There may not be a tomorrow for you.
86,400 seconds per day. What are you going to do with them? Some of those are already used for work. Some might be used for sleep. Some might be used for the other aspects of our daily life, like showering, eating, those necessity type things, maybe commuting. But then what about the rest of the seconds that are unused, that are not already claimed? What can we do with those? How can we make those valuable? Because if we don't use those, they just expire. We can't add them to the next day. And then those hours or those seconds and even minutes and hours that are already kind of claimed at work, driving in the car, bathing, eating, can we make the most of those even more? Can we make those even more valuable? What do we eat for health? Who do we eat with? Family, friends, communion, together with people. At work, how can we be a positive influence? What can we do to help others? Sure, we got our job to do. How can I be a better employee, a better employer? So there's always something that we can do to better ourselves. 86,400 seconds. And then there's some days where that 86,400 seconds is a grind and we barely get through it. And some days it's like, man, I wish I had more than 86,400 seconds in a day because I got a lot of energy to go. But again, what are we going to do with that time? And then what's our priorities? Our priorities, is it only work? Or is it family? Is it friendship? Is it a religion? What's our priorities? How can we maximize 86,400 seconds? And then what about not putting it off, not putting it off, not putting it off? Now is the time. Now is the time to be with family. Now is the time to go on that trip. Now is the time to invest in others. Now is the time to check up on our friends. One of the things that was kind of a blessing in disguise at the end of Chris's life was he broke up or had a split with a girlfriend. And so I'm sitting at home a couple weeks before, I think it was mid-January, and all of a sudden he just shows up at my house. And we got to hang out for the day. And the reason why he showed up was because his girlfriend broke up with him and he didn't want to be home alone, so he came over. So we got to hang out. And that was the last real weekend, last real Saturday that we got to hang out together and just talk. We didn't really do anything. We were just hanging around the house, talking, whatever we did, hanging out. Because then the next weekend or so, he had a concert. He got to perform at a concert in Long Beach. And then I think the next week or so, it happened. Car accident. And so I'm kind of thankful that I have that last weekend, that last Saturday where he came over and we got to hang out. And so that's a treasured memory that normally wouldn't have happened. But I did have things planned that day. But I just blew them off because he came over. And now my 86,400 seconds on that day became a lot more valuable than maybe washing the car and doing whatever other things I had to do, laundry, whatever. And so sometimes we have to make it, make an intent, be intentional in our time. And maybe sometimes we have to weigh, is this really important? Is it really important that I get home and finish this project? Or is it more important that I get home and spend time with my family? Is it more important that I take this phone call or let it go to voicemail? And you be the judge of it. Sometimes, we have to do certain things. But again, is it really necessary? Or can we put it off because we need to put our priorities? We need to send that email now, make that phone call now, hang out with those people now, because there might not be a tomorrow.
The reason someone commits suicide is because an absence of hope. It's like there's no light at the end of the tunnel. That's when they begin to whack themselves and think about killing themselves, because oftentimes we end up making a permanent decision off temporary feelings. Having a bad day does not mean that you have a bad life. Life is seasonal. All of life comes to us with phases of winning and losing. Right now you're in a winning phase. Well, awesome, man. I'm happy for you. Be prepared. The losing season is coming. And if you're in a losing season right now, hey, guess what? Keep doing the work. Keep pushing through, because the winning season is coming, guaranteed. What you can't determine is the timeline. If you realize that I'm just having a bad day, maybe a bad week, shit, I might be having a bad month or two, but I don't have a bad life, and maybe you go through a short gratitude list of how awesome life is. You woke up today, fucking A, you have air in your lungs, your heart's beating, you are better than most people. So if you could show a little gratitude, then you go, you know what? I could deal with the suck for a few more weeks or days or months, and I'll keep working. And that's a sign of hope.
There's some hard truth right there in that comment. But yeah, we take a look at things that are going on in our lives now, and maybe they're not going so well. But is our life really that bad when we take a overlook, an overview? Maybe from the micro view, our life isn't going so well right now. But from the macro view, maybe it's not so bad. And that's one of the things that I've had to teach myself over the years, because in the radio business, it can go south in a minute. February 4th, Saturday, February 5th, a phone call in a minute. February 4th became a different day. Some of these other people that we're talking about, senior year in high school, for a couple of us, things changed. For another gal, post-graduation, that coming of age story no longer was the so-called happily ever after. Hopefully it is now. But in the immediate, it wasn't. There wasn't going to be a happily ever after. Fortunately, there's a possibility that now there could be. And so we got to take a look at that. So maybe the things that we're dealing with now, in that 86,400 seconds, maybe it's not going very well. But is life going to be better? What about tomorrow? What about next week? Yeah, it might be a struggle. It might be a grind. Life might be hitting us hard. But it's okay. Because down the road, things can get better. One of the analogies that I can only think of is the countless number of people that I've talked to, young women that I've talked to, or just people in general, women in general, that were faced with a situation with an unwanted pregnancy. And obviously we know that's a huge hot button issue in society today. Lots of political pressure, religious pressure, and so on. But in that moment, of finding out an unwanted pregnancy, it's the end of the world. Right? What do? I have to drop out of school. I have to do this. 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 In fact, there was a lot of people that I've talked to that are now going back to get your education through the GED program and stuff that were in that exact same boat in high school. Got pregnant, had to drop out, take care of the family, whatever. And they share their struggles at the time, at the moment, and the decisions that they were forced to consider based on various reasons. But all of them who decided to have the baby, which is a majority of them that I talked to, they decided that they were going to go through with it. In that moment, things were difficult. Tears, sadness, anxiety, not knowing what's going to happen. But now, when the baby's born, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, whatever it is later, they are happy. They're relieved. They're glad. It's like the best thing in their life is their children. Or maybe you're just struggling because you are poor, hard to make ends meet, and you get pregnant again in that moment. But then what happens years later? It's the greatest thing. They're so glad they have their kids in their life. That's kind of what it's like for us. We might be going through life struggling with things, and in the moment, in the now, it seems very difficult, very hard, like it's the end of the world. But if we continue fighting, we don't give up hope. We look to the future. We look for those good things. We look to put our best foot forward. We look for the positive. Then down the road, things get better. Things aren't so bleak, aren't so bad. And the decisions that we could have made, and maybe some people tell us we should have made back then, would have been the wrong decision to make. But now, in the future, which has now become the present, it's good. And that's what we got to look at. Sure, life might be hitting us now, today, this week, this month, but there's still hope for the future as long as we're breathing, as long as we're healthy and breathing. I know a lot of people that have been dealing with a lot of sickness, illness, life-threatening illnesses, and some of them have been able to battle through it. Others are still fighting and struggling. But as long as there's hope, which was at the bottom of Pandora's box after all this bad stuff came out, as long as there's hope, we can keep fighting that there will be a better day. Because in the end, this is what we can have.
You know, as we come to the end of this phase of our life, we find ourselves trying to remember the good times and trying to forget the bad times. And we find ourselves thinking about the future. We start to worry, thinking, what am I going to do? Where am I going to be in 10 years? But I say to you, hey, look at me. Please, don't worry so much. Because in the end, none of us have very long on this earth. Life is fleeting. And if you're ever distressed, cast your eyes to the summer sky. When the stars are strung across the velvety night, and when a shooting star streaks through the blackness, turning night into day, make a wish. Think of me. And make your life spectacular.
That could be a goal that we all have. Make our life spectacular. Make our life spectacular to us. Life is fleeting. Why do we worry so much? Yeah, there's things we do have to be responsible for. But why do we worry so much? Why do we do the have tos all the time? Yeah, we have to work and be responsible in our day-to-day stuff, but how about in our free time? The have tos, 86,400 seconds in a day. There's a few of those that we have to do things, but within those have to seconds are the things that we can do to have a life spectacular. In the 86,400 seconds that we don't have to do anything, can we make that spectacular? Are we going to spend it being down and worrying? Are we going to try to lift ourselves up? Are we going to try to reach out? Are we going to remember the good times and look forward to the better times? A lot of people now are focusing on the negative. You can scroll through social media and see the negative. Negative for everything. People that have some political ideology where they just can't be happy no matter what happens. Some other ideologies where they just can't be happy no matter what. Why are you wasting your 86,400 seconds on that? Why am I wasting my 86,400 seconds on meaningless scrolling through social media? Now, sure, there could be some good things there. And fortunately, since the change when TikTok went dark and has come back, my algorithm has changed to some better things. And there's more things on there that I enjoy. But again, what is it that draws us to the negative? Let's spend those 86,400 seconds doing something fun, making our life spectacular, making our job spectacular, making our commute spectacular. Maybe that could be a focus. And only you would know how to do that in your life. People could suggest things. I could suggest things. But does it fit your life? Does it affect the people around you, how you do that? Maybe we talk about this all the time. We have greatness in us. We have greatness in us. We need to bring that out. We need to raise the standard in our lives so that then we can have a positive effect on the people around us. And then maybe they raise the standard in their lives. And now it goes on and on and on. And now a lot of people's lives are becoming spectacular. We take our passion, we make it happen. We let ourselves be great. Spectacular is ultimately then what we're driving for. And so along the road of life, things may come, bumps in the road, hurdles that we got to go around or jump over, obstacles we got to deal with, financial, relationship, etc. But we can be spectacular in how we solve those problems. We can be spectacular in overcoming those problems. We can be spectacular in the stories that we tell on how we overcame those things. Because life is fleeting. Days are fleeting, 86,400 seconds. Why do we worry so much? Maybe we should focus on the good things. Start establishing some more stimulating things in life instead of coming home and watching TV all day, all night. Binge watching stuff, whatever. Maybe you do toast the sunset with wine. Maybe you do greet the day on the back patio with a cup of coffee. Maybe we do take our commute. And maybe we do leave 5-10 minutes early so we don't have to be flipping people off as we're racing down wherever it is we're going to try to get to work on time because we're running late. Maybe we establish ourselves in that 86,400 seconds, a life that's spectacular and something that we can control and think back on the day like, wow, today went really good. We minimized the negative, we maximized and optimized the positive. And it was a great day. And we give all we can of what we have for that day. And we make life spectacular. We don't worry about the suck. We don't worry about the things that are hitting us. And maybe it requires us reaching out. I tell you this all the time. If you ever need to reach out to somebody, you're going through something, you don't know who to turn to, maybe you're embarrassed to turn to somebody. You know, sometimes it's hard to talk to family and friends about certain things. Sometimes it is easier to talk to a stranger. And sometimes the first time you go to a therapist, that's the first time you're probably meeting them, and we share secrets, right? Because we want some feedback. Or the bartender, right? I can help. I could be that first person you call. Maybe I help you personally. Maybe I just listen. Sometimes maybe all you need to do is vent. Or maybe I can refer you to some other people that I know that could be more of a help, more qualified to help what you're going through. But you don't have to do it alone, is the point. You can send me an email, 2stepsaheadpodcast@gmail.com, TWO, 2stepsaheadpodcast@gmail.com. I'm on social media, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. Send me a message through there. Fortunately, I've been able to experience a lot in life. Unfortunately, some of it has been difficult. Not as difficult as other people. A lot of people have had it way worse than I ever have and probably ever will. But I think through my experience in life, whether it's teaching, education, the radio business, kind of moving around the country, living in different places, experiencing different things, I've been fortunate to develop an understanding of people, and how society works. And just through observation, been able to kind of take notice of how people are. When you work in the people business, whether it's radio, whether it's education, I've done security because I've needed to. There's been times where I've gotten laid off of radio, the biggest suck in life. And I've had to do other things. So I get a job working security. Not that great, but I made it work. And from that, I've learned a lot of things just by watching people. And so I've developed this kind of understanding of people. Listen to them. Reach out. TWO is everything. 2stepsaheadpodcast@gmail.com. And I will help you as best as I can. Because 86,400 seconds in a day times however many days we have, and tomorrow might not be there for us. We're not promised tomorrow. We act and plan as if tomorrow's going to come, but tomorrow might not be there for us. What are we going to do today? What are we going to do? What are we going to do now to make life spectacular? This is 2 Steps Ahead Podcast. You can check out our website, radiowarp.com. That's radio, WARP, radiowarp.com. Many things there that you can enjoy and experience. But if you look for the 2 Steps Ahead Podcast show logo, you can click on that and past shows will pop up on video form. You click on the videos, you can watch them, or they take you to our Rumble page. There's an orange banner that goes across the center of the page, and that's SoundCloud, the audio portion of it. You can actually download those and take them with you on the go. There's other things on the website as well that you can check out, but radiowarp.com, radio WARP. Email 2stepsaheadpodcast@gmail.com. Like I said, social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, all the places. We're on YouTube as well. And then if you could just do an internet search, TWO for TWO, 2 Steps Ahead Podcast, we pop up. So we're pretty easy to find. And then also just, hey Siri, hey Google, hey Alexa, play TWO, 2 Steps Ahead, and we pop up. Find us anywhere, Spotify, Pandora, iHeartMedia, Apple Podcasts. Like I said, we're pretty much anywhere and everywhere. And we're here for you. So, 2 Steps Ahead Podcast, encouraging you, take your passion, make it happen, let yourself be great. I'm signing them. Hey, thanks for listening. Do tell a friend. And until next time, God bless.